Learn to never argue. Think about the last argument you had. Not the words. Not the other person. Not who was right or who was wrong. Think about how you felt after. Drained. Unsettled. Replaying it. Reconstructing what you said and what you should have said. Wondering if it changed something. Wondering what they think now. Carrying the weight of it long after the moment ended. And here is the question the Stoics want you to sit with this morning. Was it worth it? Not whether you were right. You may have been completely right. Was the argument, the energy spent, the peace sacrificed, the relationship strained, the mental real estate consumed for hours afterward, was any of it worth what it cost you? The Stoics answered this question definitively. And their answer was not what most people expect. They said the person who wins an argument has lost something more valuable than the argument was worth. And the person who refuses to argue, not from weakness, not from fear, not from having nothing to say, but from genuine inner sovereignty, that person has won something that no argument can ever produce. Peace. Clarity. The unassailable dignity of a mind that cannot be provoked into losing itself. Marcus Aurelius faced senators who questioned his decisions, generals who undermined his authority, philosophers who challenged his thinking, and enemies who sought to destabilize everything he built. He was the most argued with man in the ancient world. And he wrote to himself in private, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Not to argue back. Not to win. To be unlike. To remain yourself, clear, grounded, unshaken, while the storm of someone else's aggression passes around you without touching your center. That is what we are building today. Welcome to Stoic Ascension. If this is your first time here, you found exactly what you needed. Every week on this channel, we go deep into ancient Stoic wisdom and translate it into real, practical tools for the life you are actually living. Subscribe right now. Hit that button. Turn on the notification bell. Because what we build here every week is something your life will be genuinely better for. Settle in. Breathe. This is going to take time. And it is going to be worth every minute. Why we argue. Before we can learn to never argue, we need to understand with complete honesty why we argue in the first place. Because the surface reason, I was defending the truth, I was standing up for myself, I was correcting something that was wrong, is almost never the real reason. The Stoics looked beneath the surface reason and found something that most people are not comfortable acknowledging. We argue because we are afraid. Not of the other person. Of what their disagreement means. About us. About our worth. About whether we are right. Not just about the topic, but about ourselves. About whether we matter. About whether our perspective has value. About whether we are being seen, respected, taken seriously. The argument is almost never about the topic. The argument is about the threat the disagreement poses to the ego. To the carefully constructed image of ourselves that requires external agreement to feel stable. Epictetus identified this with devastating clarity. He wrote, "If you wish to make progress, you must be content to appear ignorant and foolish in external matters." Content to appear ignorant. Content to let someone disagree with you without needing to correct them. Content to be misunderstood without launching a campaign of clarification. Most people cannot do this. Because their sense of self is located outside themselves, in other people's agreement, in being seen as right, in the validation that comes from winning the exchange. And when that external validation is threatened, when someone disagrees, challenges, dismisses, or attacks, the ego panics. And the argument begins. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the people who argued with him, senators who questioned, critics who undermined, and his practice was to ask himself one question before responding. He asked, "What do I actually lose if I do not respond to this?" And the answer, almost always, was nothing. Nothing of actual value. Nothing that belongs to what he genuinely was. Nothing that could touch the inner life he had spent decades building. The argument would have cost him energy, time, peace, clarity, and the goodwill of the people watching. The silence, the deliberate, chosen, sovereign silence, cost him nothing except the temporary relief of letting the ego defend itself. And the ego's defense is almost always the most expensive thing we buy. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those who you are capable of improving. People likely to improve you. People you are capable of improving. Arguments with anyone who fits neither description. People who are committed to their position regardless of evidence. People who are arguing from wounded ego rather than genuine inquiry. Seneca would say, do not spend yourself there. There is nothing to be built in that exchange. Only something to be lost. Why do we argue? Because we have not yet fully located our worth inside ourselves. Because we still need external agreement to feel secure. Because the ego has not yet learned what the Stoics spent their lives teaching, that your value, your clarity, your truth, none of it requires anyone's agreement to be real. The first meditation, locating your center. Everything we are building today begins with this. Finding the place inside you that cannot be argued with, cannot be provoked, cannot be destabilized by someone else's disagreement or anger or need to be right. The Stoics called this the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. The sovereign center of your being where reason lives and where genuine choice is made. The part of you that exists beneath the ego's need for validation. Beneath the emotional reactivity. Beneath the habitual patterns of defense and counterattack that most people call personality. It is there. In every person. Often buried under years of reactivity and conditioning. But there. Permanent. Inassailable. Yours. Let us find it now. Settle into your position. Let the body be still. Let the breath slow, not forced, simply allowed to find its natural, unhurried rhythm. Close your eyes if that feels right. Or keep a soft, downward, unfocused gaze. Take 3 full breaths. Slow inhale. Hold. Slow exhale. With each exhale, feel the body release a fraction of its held tension. Now bring your awareness inward. Away from the thoughts about what someone said or what you should have said or what might happen in the next conversation. Away from the mental rehearsal of future arguments and the replay of past ones. Inward. To the place that is simply here. Simply present. Simply aware. Notice what that feels like. The quality of being present with yourself, not thinking about yourself, but simply being with yourself. Without agenda. Without performance. Without needing this moment to be anything other than what it is. This is your center. This is the hegemonikon. The place that no argument can reach, because it is not located in what anyone says about you or to you. It is located in what you actually are. Marcus Aurelius returned to this center constantly. He wrote, "Look well into yourself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if you will always look there." Always spring up. Not sometimes. Not when circumstances are favorable. Always. Because the source is inside, not dependent on anything external to continue flowing. Breathe here for a few minutes. Simply notice what it feels like to be in your own center. Without defending it. Without explaining it. Without needing anyone else to acknowledge it. This is the foundation of never arguing. Not a technique. Not a strategy. A place to live from. A way of being so grounded in your own inner reality that the invitation to argument, however provocative, however personal, however apparently justified, simply does not find purchase. Because you are already full, already clear, already located somewhere that disagreement cannot dislodge you from. Stay here. Breathe here. Return here as many times as you need throughout this meditation, and throughout every day that follows. What arguing actually costs you? The Stoics were intensely practical. They believed that every choice, including the choice to argue, should be evaluated by what it actually produces and what it actually costs. Not what it feels like in the moment. What it actually costs. And the cost of arguing is almost never what people think it is. People think the cost of not arguing is the loss of being right, of being heard, of defending their position, of maintaining their dignity. But the Stoics identified the real cost, and it runs in exactly the opposite direction. The cost of arguing is your peace, your clarity, your energy, your time, your presence in the moment that the argument hijacks, your capacity to think clearly in the hours after it, your emotional availability for the people and things that actually matter. And, most devastatingly, the cost of arguing is your character. Because every argument pulls you slightly further from the person you are trying to become. Every reactive defense, every escalation, every moment where you chose the ego's satisfaction over your genuine values, these shape you. Not dramatically, gradually, but consistently. And the person shaped by 1,000 arguments is not the person they would have been without them. Seneca wrote, "Retire into yourself as much as you can. Retire into yourself. When the invitation to argument arrives, retire. Not in defeat, in sovereignty, in the deliberate choice to protect what is more valuable than being right in someone else's eyes." Let us do the second meditation. The cost audit. Bring to mind a recent argument, or a pattern of arguing, the type of situation that reliably pulls you into conflict. Hold it in your awareness without engaging with the content, without relitigating who was right. Simply observe it as an event. Now audit the cost. What did it cost you in energy? In the hours of mental replay that followed? In the emotional residue that lingered? In the clarity you lost for the rest of that day? What did it cost you in the relationship? Not in a catastrophic sense necessarily, but in the small erosion of goodwill, the slight hardening, the subtle shift from openness to guardedness. What did it cost you in your own sense of yourself? Did you like who you were during the argument? Did your words reflect your values? Did your responses come from your best self or from the reactive, defensive, wounded version of yourself that arguments tend to produce? Be honest, completely honest. Not to punish yourself, to learn. To see clearly what the argument actually produced versus what it cost. And then ask, was there a version of that situation where you could have held your position, maintained your values, protected your boundaries, refused to accept what was unacceptable without engaging in the argument itself? Almost always, the answer is yes. The Stoics were not passive. They were not doormats. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire. He made hard decisions, held firm positions, refused to be moved on things that mattered. But he did it from his center, from reason, from values, from genuine conviction. Not from ego, not from the need to win, not from the reactive spiral that produces arguments. There is a difference between holding your position and arguing about it, between communicating your truth and fighting for it to be accepted, between maintaining your boundary and making your boundary someone else's problem. The Stoic masters the first of each pair, and leaves the second entirely alone. The Stoic response to provocation. The moment of provocation is everything. It is the moment, the specific, often brief, often surprising moment, when someone says something that would normally trigger the argument response. The criticism, the dismissal, the accusation, the unfairness, the deliberate provocation, the accidental one, the tone that lands wrong, the word that hits an old wound. That moment is where the practice lives. And the Stoics developed a response to that moment that is one of the most powerful things I have ever encountered in the entire breadth of human philosophy. They called it the pause, not a technique, a practice, the deliberate, trained, consistent insertion of space between the stimulus and the response, between what was said and what you say back, between the provocation and what it becomes. Epictetus described it this way. He said that between every impression and every response there exists a gap, and in that gap, however narrow, however brief, lives the entirety of human freedom. Because in that gap you can choose, not react. Choose. And the choice available in that gap is always the same. Do I respond from my center, from my values, my genuine convictions, my best self? Or do I react from my ego, from my wound, my defensiveness, my need to win? The untrained person never reaches the gap. The reaction happens before the awareness arrives. The argument begins before the choice is made. The trained Stoic, the person who has practiced this pause for days and months and years, lives in the gap, has made the gap wide enough to step into reliably, has practiced the choice so many times that choosing from the center rather than reacting from the ego is not effort. It is habit. Let us do the third meditation. The gap practice. Breathe slowly, steadily. and bring to mind a type of situation that typically triggers your argument response. Not the most extreme one. A common one. The kind that happens regularly. See it clearly. The setting. The person. The thing they say or do that typically initiates the reaction. Now, in your imagination, slow the moment down. The way a film director slows a crucial scene to let you see every detail. The words arrive. You feel the impact. You feel the familiar pull, the activation, the defensiveness, the impulse to respond. And now, pause. In your imagination, create the gap. Feel what it feels like to be in the moment of provocation without reacting. To hold the activation without releasing it into argument. To feel the impulse fully and choose not to follow it. What is available in that gap? Clarity. The ability to see the situation as it actually is rather than as your ego's first interpretation of it. The person in front of you, what are they actually experiencing? What is driving their behavior? Is this really about you? Or is this their own pain, their own fear, their own unresolved interior finding its way out? Compassion. Not naive compassion. Not the kind that excuses genuinely harmful behavior, but the recognition that almost all provocative behavior comes from suffering. That the person most desperate to win an argument is almost always the person most afraid they are losing something that matters to them. Voice. The recognition that you have won. Right now. In this moment. Before the reaction takes over. You can engage. You can decline. You can say something or say nothing. You can address the situation later from a calmer place. You can decide this exchange is not worth your energy and move on entirely. All of these options are available in the gap. None of them are available after the argument has begun. Practice staying in the gap. Breathe through it. Feel the activation without releasing it. And know that every time you do this, every time you hold the gap for 1 second longer than the last, you are widening it, making it more reliable, building the practice. The art of silence. The Stoics had an understanding of silence that goes far deeper than most people in the modern world have access to. In a culture that treats every opinion as worth expressing, every disagreement as worth correcting, every injustice as worth loudly confronting, the Stoic practice of deliberate, chosen, powerful silence sounds almost like surrender. It is the opposite. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Speak only when you are certain that what you have to say is better than silence." Better than silence. Not just adequate, not just true. Better than the alternative of saying nothing. Think about how rarely most conversation actually clears this bar. How much of what we say in arguments, in the heat of emotion, in the urgent need to be heard and understood and agreed with, is genuinely better than silence would have been. The Stoics believed that silence was the most underused power available to a human being, because silence does several things that argument cannot. Silence preserves your energy, the energy spent in argument, the emotional expenditure, the mental resources consumed, the time that cannot be recovered. None of that is lost when you choose silence. It stays with you, available for something that actually deserves it. Silence communicates more than argument. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive truth in the entire Stoic teaching on argument, but it is verifiable in your own experience. Think about the times when someone responded to a provocation with complete, calm, genuine silence. Not the silence of having nothing to say. The silence of having so much composure that engagement is beneath them. What did that silence communicate? Strength. Certainty. A quality of inner life that the arguing person visibly did not have. And what did the person arguing communicate? Need. Fear. Desperation for the other person to see things their way. The loudest person in an argument is almost never the most powerful person in the room. Silence also creates space for the other person to hear themselves. When you stop engaging, when you remove the back and forth fuel that arguments run on, the other person is often left holding their own words. And those words, unsupported by your reaction, sometimes reveal themselves even to the speaker as less solid than they felt. Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." Listen twice as much as you speak. In un argument listen. Not to formulate your rebuttal. To actually hear what is being said. Because when you genuinely listen, when the other person feels actually heard, the argument often dissolves on its own. Because most arguments are not really about the topic. They are about someone needing to be heard. And you can give that gift without engaging in the argument at all. Let us do the fourth meditation. The silence practice. Breathe slowly. Feel the quality of this moment of silence around you. If there is external sound, notice it without judgment. Let it be part of the silence rather than an intrusion on it. Silence is not the absence of all sound. It is the presence of a still, undefended inner space. Feel what this silence is. Not empty. Full of clarity. Full of presence. Full of the quality of being fully here without agenda or defense or the need for anything to be different. This is what you can bring to the moment of provocation. This inner silence. This quality of being so grounded in your own center that the noise of someone else's argument moves around you like wind around a mountain. Felt, heard, acknowledged, and not entered. Practice living in this silence for several minutes. Let thoughts arise, including thoughts of past arguments, things unsaid, grievances not yet resolved. Notice them. And practice the same response you are building for external arguments. Notice. Return to center. Stay in the silence. This is not suppression. This is not pretending the thoughts are not there. It is the practiced recognition that not every thought deserves engagement. Not every feeling deserves expression. Not every provocation, internal or external, deserves a response. Some things are better met with silence. Most things, actually. When communication is necessary. Here I want to speak to something important. Because this teaching, learn to never argue, can be misunderstood as passivity, as allowing mistreatment, as swallowing genuine grievances in the name of Stoic composure. That is not what the Stoics meant. And that is not what this practice produces when it is done correctly. There is a difference, a crucial, essential, completely non-negotiable difference, between choosing not to argue and choosing not to communicate. The Stoics were not silent about injustice. Marcus Aurelius made hard decisions. He confronted corruption. He held generals accountable. He refused to be moved on matters of genuine principle. But he did it from his center, from reason, from his values. Not from ego, not from reactivity, not from the wounded place that arguments come from. The question is never, do I have something important to say? Sometimes you absolutely do. The question is, can I say it from my center rather than from my wound? Because the same truth, said from the center versus said from the wound, lands completely differently. The truth said from the center is clear, direct, grounded, and hard to dismiss. The truth said from the wound is tangled with emotion, defensiveness, and the ego's need to win, and it is easy for the other person to dismiss by attacking the delivery rather than engaging with the content. When communication is genuinely necessary, when something needs to be addressed, when a boundary needs to be named, when a truth needs to be spoken, the Stoic practice is to wait, to choose the moment deliberately, to make sure you are speaking from your center before you open your mouth. Seneca wrote about this as the art of the right time. He believed that the same words, delivered at different moments from different inner states, were essentially different messages, and that the person who mastered the art of timing, who could hold what needed to be said until the right moment from the right place, was infinitely more effective than the person who said everything immediately from wherever they happened to be emotionally. Here is a practice for this. When something needs to be addressed, when the impulse arises to correct, to confront, to communicate something important, ask 3 questions before you speak. Is this the right time? Am I in a state of genuine center, calm, clear, grounded, or am I still in the activation of the provocation? If the latter, wait. Not forever. Until the clarity returns. Is this the right way? Is what I am about to say coming from my values, from genuine care for the situation or the relationship, or is it coming from the ego's need to be right and be seen as right? If the latter, wait. Is this the right thing? Does this need to be said at all? Or is this the ego convincing itself that its grievance is a principle? Sometimes, often, it is. And the discipline of sitting with that question before speaking is itself a form of the practice. 3 questions. They take 30 seconds. And they prevent the vast majority of arguments before they begin. The deeper freedom. We are building towards something today that goes deeper than a communication skill. Deeper than a conflict management technique. Deeper than a strategy for winning social situations by not appearing to need to win them. We are building toward genuine freedom. The kind Epictetus described and embodied. The kind that cannot be taken by anyone or anything because it is not located in anything external. The person who has genuinely learned to never argue has freed themselves from one of the most energy-consuming patterns in human social life. They have recovered the hours spent in argument and replay. They have recovered the emotional resources spent in defensiveness and reactivity. They have recovered the mental clarity consumed by the need to be right. And they have redirected all of that energy, time, clarity, and presence toward the things that actually build a life worth having. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? More grievous are the consequences than the causes." The original provocation, however real, however unfair, is almost always smaller than what the argument around it costs. The argument inflates the provocation, gives it weight and duration and significance it would not have had if met with silence and composure. And the person who learns to never argue learns to see this in real time. Learns to measure the actual weight of what is being offered against the cost of engaging with it. And learns, reliably, consistently, that almost nothing is worth the cost. Let us do the 5th meditation. The freedom practice. Breathe slowly, deeply. Feel the body soften with each exhale. Bring to mind someone you have argued with repeatedly. Not with anger, with curiosity. Simply notice the pattern. The same triggers. The same escalations. The same unsatisfying endings. The same emotional residue that lingers for hours or days. Now imagine, fully and clearly, what would happen if you simply stopped. Not stopped caring about the relationship. Not stopped having your own perspective. But stopped engaging in the argument pattern. Completely. Not as a punishment or a withdrawal. As a genuinely free choice. What would happen to your energy? Your clarity? Your sense of yourself? And what would happen to the relationship? Because here is something that surprises people who try this in their actual lives. When one person stops arguing, when one person chooses the center consistently, responds from composure rather than reactivity, refuses to be drawn into the pattern, the dynamic of the relationship often changes. Not always, but often. Because arguments require 2 participants. And the person who consistently declines the invitation changes the nature of what the other person is able to create. You cannot argue alone. Your composure may be the most generous thing you ever offer someone who has been pulling you into conflict. Feel what it would feel like to be free of this pattern. To have back the energy it has been consuming. To approach every conversation, even difficult ones, from a place of genuine inner stillness that cannot be disturbed without your permission. That freedom is available to you, not as a distant achievement, as a practice you can begin today, in the next conversation, in the next moment of provocation, in the next gap between stimulus and response where you can choose differently than you have before. Living the practice. We are near the end of this extended meditation, and I want to give you the structure for living this practice, not just understanding it, in the days and weeks ahead. Because this is not a one-time insight. It is a daily, moment-by-moment practice of choosing the center over the ego, the silence over the argument, the long-term peace over the short-term satisfaction of being heard. Every morning, before the first conversation of the day, return to your center. The practice we did at the beginning of this meditation. 5 minutes. Breathe. Find the place inside that cannot be argued with. Let that be the place you live from today. Every evening, audit the day. Where did you engage in argument when silence or composure would have served better? Not with shame, with curiosity. What triggered the engagement? What was the ego protecting? What would you do differently tomorrow? And every time, every single time, the invitation to argument arrives, remember the gap. The space between stimulus and response. The moment of choice that always exists even when it feels like there is no choice at all. In that gap, ask one question. The Stoics returned to this question constantly. Marcus Aurelius asked it. Epictetus taught it. Seneca wrote about it across decades of letters. The question is, will this matter in a year? Not is it important right now. Will it matter in a year? Almost nothing you have ever argued about will matter in a year. Almost nothing. And the recognition of that, felt genuinely, not just understood intellectually, is one of the most reliable dissolvers of the argument impulse that the Stoics ever discovered. Seneca wrote, "Begin at once to live, and count each separate day as a separate life. Each day a separate life. And in that life, how do you want to spend your energy? In the argument that will not matter? Or in the building of something that will? You have been building something today. In each breath. In each meditation. In each deliberate return to the center. In each practiced moment of choosing composure over reactivity. That is real. That accumulates. That becomes, over time, who you are rather than something you occasionally manage to do." Subscribe to Stoic Ascension. Right now. Hit that button. Turn on the notification bell. Because every week on this channel we go this deep into the ancient wisdom that actually changes not just how you think but how you live. How you show up in the hardest moments. How you move through the most provocative situations. How you protect your peace in a world that is constantly trying to pull you away from it. This is a community of people who have decided to ascend, to rise above the reactive patterns that keep most people cycling through the same conflicts, the same arguments, the same exhausting loops. To build, through daily Stoic practice, an inner life so grounded, so clear, so genuinely free that argument simply loses its appeal. There is a place here for you. Subscribe. Share this with someone who is exhausted from arguing. Return to this meditation whenever you feel the pull toward conflict and need to be reminded of what is actually available to you in that moment. Because the practice continues. Every day. Every conversation. Every gap between stimulus and response. And you are more capable of filling that gap with wisdom than you have ever believed. Stay disciplined. Stay present.